Diplomania is pleased to welcome you to the first episode of Candid Diplomacy, a series in which we give you a closer look into the lives of scholars, practitioners, and diplomats. To commemorate the beginning of the Candid Diplomacy series, we could not think of a more appropriate figure. Our guest for today is certainly one of the most dynamic and captivating personalities you will come across on this campus. His illustrious career in the Indian Foreign Service of 36 years, might I add, ended with his tenure as the Indian ambassador to France. This gentleman has more than one feather in his cap, or should I say that he wears several caps. Other than his tenure in the Indian Foreign Service, he has been a part of several think tanks, he has taught us, and I think we, the students here, we know him for his persona in the classroom, for the way he engages us with his anecdotes, and the manner in which he combines his teaching with a mix of storytelling that always has us rapt with attention. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Ambassador Mohan Kumar. It is an honor to be interviewing you today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ambassador. So, my very first question for you is one which sheds some light on your journey to where you are today. You've had a very long and interesting career in the Indian Foreign Services. So, for those aspiring diplomats here, for those who look up to you as a role model and try to emulate you and your career, could you share some defining moments of your journey and some tips on how to get to where you are?
Thank you very much. So it's interesting you asked that question, and I cannot but go back to the conversations I had with my father when I was 12, 13 years old. He was a professor of economics at a college in the southern part of India, and he would always ask the four siblings, including me, around the dining table as to what is your dream. So he would constantly ask me, and one day I think I said, I want to just travel 100 countries before I die. So he said that's an excellent goal to have, and then he's quickly realized that he didn't have the financial means to send me to 100 different countries. So he said, why don't you join the Foreign Service? I said, sounds like a good plan. So I think my initial reason for joining the Foreign Service was really wanderlust, just to travel and see the world. And then I think when I became a little bit more mature, I realized that that there was nothing better than representing India abroad. You know, I was not still thinking of being an ambassador or whatever, but just having the privilege and the honor to represent your country. So that's what drove me. Having said that, I was never sure of making it, because this exam, as you know, and I think all the students know, it's a bit of a lottery. You know, you take it, and if it happens, it happens. So I had to have a plan B. So I did my MBA from Delhi University. I was working with Tatas, so I kind of was very relaxed when I took the exam. In fact, in the interview board, I had just put in Foreign Service as the only option. So one of the interviewers said, "You're very arrogant. How come are you so sure of getting into the Foreign Service?" I said, "No, I'm not sure of getting in, but that's what I want, because I don't believe I'm cut out for the Indian Administrative Service." So anyway, it all worked out. But this is one message I will have for your audience today, which is that I really believe the state is back. Most of the big problems of the world are going to be resolved by states, by governments, not by Goldman Sachs and Citibank. So I would say give it a shot, because there is nothing better. If your goal in life is to make a difference to people and to make a difference to society, there's no better place to do it than belonging to the government.
Those are some very inspiring words, and that's a perfect segue to my next question, actually, because you talked about the pride of representing your nation, and of course it's a matter of immense honor and immense pride to be doing that, but I'm sure there have been moments where you have been restrained by your country's stance or your country's foreign policy. So my next question was, in the course of your career, have there been moments where you've been a little bit perplexed or confounded? We've always seen you as this individual who always stays in character, is always has the ability to glide through any situation smoothly, but which is why we wanted to ask you, has there been a moment which has actually left our revered Professor Mohan stumped or confounded?
No, sure. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said there weren't moments like that. I think most of the moments I would say were when I was India's negotiator at first the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and then the World Trade Organization. I was India's negotiator for intellectual property rights. And intellectual property rights is an area where India took a position very different from either the Western countries led by the United States or by the rest of the world. So we took positions which were very different and sometimes very hard to defend. The way I look at this issue, and we are all going to be faced with this problem. One, I use the Mahatma Gandhi oath, which is, the Mahatma Gandhi once said that if you are faced with a very difficult situation, think of the poorest person you met and see whether what you're going to do is going to make his or her life better or worse. If it's going to make it worse, don't do it. So my simple prescription in the GATT and the WTO was, if it did not improve the lot of the 400 million people, for example, in India, who live in abject poverty, I wouldn't do it. The other thing about civil servants is that you will be asked your inputs and you give it without fear or favor. But once the Prime Minister has decided and the Prime Minister's office has decided, the buck stops there. You can't really, as a junior diplomat or even as an ambassador, try to overrule it. If you are in violent disagreement with your government, you are at liberty to resign. Nothing prevents you from resigning. That's the Westminster cabinet system. So I have followed that faithfully, but I think there is so much you can do as an individual in terms of tweaking a policy. I wouldn't go as far as to say that I can influence a policy wholesale, but you can tweak the policy by bringing the focus that you have, which is, in terms of how it will affect the weaker sections in India. So I think on the whole, that kind of kept me in good stead. So that's how I went through some of the toughest moments. But those tough moments will happen. It doesn't matter whether you're in diplomacy or your corporate life or you're teaching. Those moments will happen. You need to be clear about what your goals are. Take a stand, but respect the hierarchy. Every place has a hierarchy. The university has a hierarchy. The government has a hierarchy. In diplomacy, we have a hierarchy. You have a foreign minister. So I think those have to be respected.
Thank you, Professor, for your answer to that question. And how you explained what you do in a moment of confusion, the Mahatma Gandhi, the reference to that. I still recall that from the class you taught us, and this was one of the things I took back with me is when in a situation when you're not sure how to proceed, to think of those who are the most least disadvantaged. So I think that's something extremely profound and extremely inspiring. So now I would like to ask you about two defining moments particularly. One is your interaction with the infamous Charles Sobhraj, and the second would be about your time in Bahrain during the Arab Spring. And I thought those of us interested in political science and social movements would find it extremely interesting to know what it was to actually live through that time and how was it to see a society in turmoil at that level.
Thank you. So the Charles Sobhraj story is actually very interesting. In my time, when we joined the Foreign Service, the government of India felt that most of us who joined the Foreign Service were from urban areas, English speaking. So they felt that we should be exposed to district administration because that's where the real India is. Real India is governed at the district level, not so much at the panchayat level, but the district level. So I was assigned Banaras district. So my grandmother, who was living at the time, was very happy because she said, oh, all your sins will be washed away and that you should take a dip at 4 o'clock, which I did with disastrous consequences for my health. But anyway, that's beside the point. So the collector there was an interesting person. And he said, we used to have conversations about the foreign service and the administrative service. He would constantly ask me, why are you joining foreign service, the administrative service? We would have loved to have somebody like you. I told him, no, I'm okay where I am. He says, then one day he says, Mohan, I want you to meet two people in life. I will not tell you who they are, but they represent the opposite ends of the spectrum of human behavior. So I said, I'm very curious. He said, no, I'll not, spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you. The driver will take you. So the driver first took me to Bismillah Khan's house, a Shehnai player, fantastic, very great gentleman. He gave me a lassi, a lot of these kids around his home in Banaras. And that was great. I was more interested in the second person because I said, Bismillah Khan is fine. He's a great figure in Banaras. So it's okay I was actually designated as assistant district magistrate for 6 months. I was ruling on property disputes and stuff. It was interesting. And the second person I met, I asked the driver, he said, sir, collector saab ne bola hai ki I should not tell you. I said, ab to bata do, we are going towards that. He said, sir, the only thing I'll tell you is we are going to the central jail. I said, what? Central jail of Banaras? So it is exactly like a Bollywood movie. It says central jail on top. And I'm entering through the jail gate. And he's still not telling me. I said, this is ridiculous. You could be letting me loose upon a murderer or something. He says, no, sir, you are meeting somebody called Sobhraj, he said. What Sobhraj? Then I quickly realized it was Charles Sobhraj. He was nattily dressed. He completely outshone me in terms of dress because I was wearing a kurta pajama and, Banaras, hot. I was not hoping to meet a VVIP. So I went in. This guy was nattily dressed, already sitting. He says, please have a seat. And the questions that he asked me were amazing. This was 1982. And he is asking me something which nobody else had asked me. He was asking me, is it really appropriate that India should be non-aligned? I said, how the hell do you know about non-aligned movement? You are Charles Sobhraj, for God's sake. You've been going around killing women left, right and center. So it was a great lesson in human psychology for me, that here is an assassin, a murderer by any stretch of imagination, but he is able to switch on and switch off. And depending on the audience, he asked me questions much before anybody in India thought about having good relations with US. He says, it makes no sense. Why are we not having good relations with US? Everybody is English speaking here. Our kids want to go to the US. Why are we going after Soviet Union? Can you believe it? I mean, it was quite amazing. So for me, it was an encounter which lasted 15, 20 minutes. The interesting thing is, I am a guy who's normally never at a loss for words. But I was. I was actually at the receiving end. He was asking most of the questions. So what I learned from that encounter, which should interest your audience, number one, this guy is a murderer, but he is absolutely intelligent, make no mistake. He's brainy. Second, I think he was in control of the situation throughout. I think he's a guy who likes to be in control. He did not allow me to get in a word edgeways. Constantly, he is deciding the pace of our meeting. And finally, he says, I want to wish you all the best. The country needs people like you in the foreign. Mind you, I just joined the foreign service. It's almost like the foreign minister wishing me, all the best in your service. Please do well for the country. If I hadn't known that he was a murderer, I would have been meeting a suave diplomat from another country at a reception over a glass of wine. I think that was an object lesson for me, that individuals have within them the full range of human behavior. And I think it's a question for the psychologist as to why a bright man like him chose to do what he did. I have no explanation. I've been struggling for an answer. By the way, recently I think something happened. He was in the UK or something. But that is an encounter I will never forget. But it taught me quite a lot about human behavior.
Individuals officials have within them a full range of human behavior. Those words still echo in my mind, that Sir just said, and that was an extremely gripping story. To think that you've had a career so filled with these kind of riveting encounters with such interesting people. Even I am at a loss for words. I don't know how to respond to something like that, how to even, I can't even fathom meeting someone like that. But that brings me to the next question that I had, or the next interesting aspect of your career that we would love to hear more about, perhaps some anecdotes of life at that time and how it was to actually see the region, which would be Bahrain during the Arab Spring.
Of course. Of course. No, it was fantastic. It's a moment for which every Foreign Service officer lives. And the moment I'm talking about is there is a bridge or a causeway that separates Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. It's about 10-12 kilometers. I was standing this side of the bridge in Bahrain and Saudi tanks rolled in. So this is a moment for which every Foreign Service officer lives, like the fall of the Berlin Wall, for example. And then this Arab Spring, where they had a wonderful monument in Bahrain, which was about a fisherman's monument which was razed to the ground. So those are the moments that Foreign Service officers live for, because that is history in the making in front of you. So I didn't know what to make of it, but for me the bigger challenge was what happens to the Indian community, because this is a country which is a population of 1.314 million, exactly 1,000 times less than India, and we had a population of 300 to 400,000 Indians. So I had to find out from the Indians what their plans were, and that was precisely the time I joined Twitter. And I realized the tremendous value of social media. I don't know what I would have done without Twitter, because all I had to do was, don't worry, I am in touch with the Bahrain government, you will be safe, but I would like to know what your plans are. Do you want to stay? Do you want to leave? And the response was absolutely overwhelming. They want to stay. Nobody wanted to leave. That kind of put me at ease, because we were thinking of making an evacuation plan for 320,000 people from Bahrain. So I thought the two things that I realized was that when you have a bigger country as a neighbor, and to which you are joined at the hip like Bahrain, then your foreign policy is pretty much decided in consultation with a bigger brother. I don't think, in all fairness, and I don't mean any disrespect, Bahrain is a country I love greatly and hugely, but I don't think Bahrain could have done much without Saudi Arabia. That's just the reality of the situation. And therefore, they decided it was in their interest to have these tanks come in from Saudi Arabia. So it taught me two things. It taught me balance of power, and it taught me real politics. And these are things which, for an international affairs student or a diplomat, it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? You're doing this all the time. So it was good to see it in practice. But for me, as I said, the real challenge was what to do with the Indians. And I was frankly relieved when all the Indians said, we want to stay. And if you want to, the good thing about Indians is when they decide something like that, they stick to it. And the second thing, they will honestly tell you, you want us to do something, tell us. And the funny thing I saw in the Indian community in Bahrain was the less prosperous they are, the more they were willing to help. It's kind of inversely proportional to the wealth you have. It was amazing. There was a driver who was getting a modest income in Bahrain, who was going around doing the maximum community help. Later on, he got the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award. So it is quite extraordinary that situations like this throw up Indians abroad who kind of rise to the occasion. And Indians, sometimes I feel, work best only in crisis situations. In non-crisis situations, we are terrible. I mean, you have to have a marriage of the daughter where the father is running around like a chicken with a head cut off, but the marriage will happen. And similarly, a crisis happens and then nobody is asking anybody else whether you speak Malayalam or Hindi or Tamil. We are Indians. But the moment the crisis is over, we conveniently go back to where we were. But that's just an aside, but I think it was a great experience for me to see balance of power, real politics at work in front of my eyes, and history literally unfold. And that was quite an amazing experience. So thank you for asking.
I have a quick additional question. I always wonder that during moments like this, during these cataclysmic moments where history is unfolding, do you realize it happening, or does it all sort of feel like after the entire episode has ended, does it feel like, is that when it sinks in that something that defining, a moment with that much gravity has unfolded? How does it feel in that moment?
So that's an excellent question, actually, and I must compliment you for it. The one thing that a boss of mine told me, and that is a habit I've had even to this day, he said, have a diary and write down what you saw. I said, why? I was a junior officer in the government of India. I said, why? He said, you don't realize that what you're doing is tremendously important. And I know this was not part of your question, but I was taking Sri Lankan refugees back from Tamil Nadu, a state to which I belong, back to Sri Lanka on a ship. And the LTT bombed that ship. We barely actually survived. So that's another moment, a great moment in my life. I was asking these women, and they frankly were nervous. The UNHCR was also on the ship, the High Commission for Refugees. They were asking these refugees in front of me, don't listen to this guy. He's the Indian government. He wants you to go back. Are you comfortable going back? Are you safe? They looked at me. I knew Tamil, the UNHCR person didn't know Tamil. Then that lady would say, it's okay, I will go back. But I could see it in her eyes. This was a 72-year-old lady. And she was right. This was not the right moment to go back. But the policy of the government of India was, listen, if Sri Lanka is improving, we can't keep these refugees forever. So I did that. And true enough, we were about to land. We just have to cross the Park Straits between Kanyakumari and the other side, right? The moment we were landing, there was a bomb. The LTT was trying to bomb. Fortunately, we survived. And then the woman met me, and she pointed a finger at me. And those are very sobering moments for a diplomat. She wagged a finger at me. I told you it isn't safe for us to go back. Of course, ultimately, they all went back. And one young lad joked to me, you may send me back, but I only have to swim the channel to come back. So what the hell are you going to do? I'm going to come back. So you have that as well. But you have these moments which kind of, and so maybe this is the place to reveal this secret. I haven't even told my wife this, but I'm going to write a book, I think, which is going to be called From Madurai to Monaco. I was born in Madurai, and Monaco is the place where I retired. I'm retired as India's ambassador to Paris, but the Indian ambassador to Paris is also accredited to a small principality or a country called Monte Carlo, Monaco. So I'm going to say Madurai to Monaco and write all of this, all of these incidents. So I hope you guys will buy.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. We just got an announcement for a book that's upcoming.
I hope.
And I'm so happy that this is the forum where Sir chose to
true.
announce it. And I could not be more excited and eager to read it. So thank you so much, Professor. And we wish you all the best for your book, and we look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
So now, to move back to more local issues, to more domestic issues, there is a contemporary debate which is ongoing about lateral entry into the IFS. Could you share your thoughts on it?
So there are two ways of looking at this. Functionally, it's the best thing to do because it makes no sense. Singapore has more diplomats than India. How does that make sense? A small country like Singapore has 1,800 or something, and we have 1,300. And for a country of 1.4 billion people, we have 179 missions and posts. So absolutely, we cannot recruit more than a particular number because the UPSC is what it is, there is an exam and so on. The problem is you have other implications. In India, the civil service is considered a closed service, and lateral entry is considered a way of diluting the service, because we don't have the system of an open door or a rotating door policy where, for example, I can come in, join the foreign service for 5 years, get out of the foreign service, do Citibank for 10 years, and then come back. So we just don't have that. Then the other problem is there are legitimate expectations of the person who joins the Indian Foreign Service to become an ambassador. And we feel that if you have people from lateral entry or lateral entrance, then that complicates the promotion and other prospects for foreign service officers. So I'm afraid, I'm going to disappoint you by saying I don't think this is happening in a hurry. I don't think it will happen. We've increased the number of recruits. So to give you an idea, I belong to the 1981 batch. So 1981 there were 20 people, now we have 36. So that's almost double. But that's as far as we would.
So you serve as the director for the G20 Centre, and of course this year is extremely important for India. So my question is, do you think, to put it very simply, do you think this is going to lead to a revival of multilateralism? And do you think institutions or organizations like the G20 can offset the deficiencies in the UN system? Or do you think this is just a year of a lot of excitement for us, a lot of fervor, and is it all going to die down and revert to the same after this?
That's such a great question. I'll have to really think hard to respond to that. It's a great question, actually. So what is clear to me is that multilateralism is on the decline. And what is ironic is that multilateralism is on the decline even while multipolarity is on the increase. You know what I'm saying? And that is a very curious situation if you look at the world. But to go back to what you asked me, I think there is no question in my mind that the UN Security Council has failed abysmally when it comes to the Russian war in Ukraine. It hasn't covered itself with glory, and it's done a bad job. What that has done is the failure of the UN system has given rise to a plethora of plurilateral fora. I'm calling it plurilateral because even G20, you really cannot say it's multilateral. It's a selective club. True, every continent is represented, but beyond that, you really can't say that G20 is multilateral. For me, it's plurilateral. But the rise of plurilaterals and the rise of minilaterals, the quadrilateral security dialogue is a minilateral, 4 countries. You got Russia, India, China, trilateral. So you got a lot of these groupings. It leads me to answer your question in the following way, which is that there's no question that these fora are trying to fill the void left by the UN Security Council and the UN. That's point number 1. Point number 2, will they succeed? That's the larger question. I thought after the Bali leaders' declaration, which I followed very closely, I thought India will have a relatively smooth time, but it's not turned out that way. Both the foreign ministers' meeting and the central bank governors' meeting that we have had, these are the 2 ministerial meetings we've had so far, those have led to what is known as a chairman's summary. They have not led to consensus documents. You know the difference, right? So I think that, to me, is an indication of the things to come, or of the way things will come, which means the war in Ukraine is going to cast a shadow on all the meetings that India is going to preside over. So short of a dramatic change on the battlefield in Ukraine, I think we are in for a fairly difficult time, because India will have to do this very tightrope walking, a delicate balancing act. We have good relations with Russia. I was in a meeting recently with the Ukrainian deputy foreign minister who had come. So I was asking her, what do you think? And I was asking her, is there any possibility for a diplomatic solution? She was of the view, not yet, because genuinely both sides think that there are battlefield gains to be made. So I still, if you don't mind my sticking my neck out, I believe actually that India has an excellent opportunity to play a mediatory role. Now that Turkey, it's happened, but then they've got elections, and Brazil's President Lula seems to have, made such contradictory noises here, there. Ukraine, for example, is not happy at the statement he made saying that Crimea should be given away, and so on. India has stayed silent, and I'm one of those who strongly believes discretion is the better part of valor. So I think it's great that we have kept quiet, but maybe when the time comes, India can try its hand. But I think it's a great opportunity otherwise for India to shape the agenda on issues like SDGs, debt relief for some of the poorer countries, climate change, climate finance, and most important, just the digital infrastructure. I mean, most of the foreign delegates are simply amazed that they can pay for a cup of tea and samosa with a UPI in India. They're not used to it. And it's fantastic what we've done in terms of technology. So I think it's an opportunity for India to showcase itself and to drive the agenda. But beyond that, we will have to see how the situation in Ukraine unfolds.
So for all those of you watching who envision a future in diplomacy and a career in the same, make note of these points, and I'm sure that actually thinking about these pearls of wisdom that Sir has shared will do us all a lot of good. That brings us to the end of this interview. Ambassador, Professor, we thank you. We are all in awe of you. I'm not sure how to actually put in a few words how interesting and how fascinating your stories, the insights you share with us are. All I can say is that I am extremely grateful to have had this opportunity to interview you and to have been taught by you. And I am sure that all those who have interacted with you and learned from you will say the same. So thank you so much, sir, for being here today. And we are extremely grateful. And we hope that we get to continue to hear from you, because as I said at the start, I think if I had to select one of the most dynamic and most captivating people to listen to, it would be Ambassador. So thank you so much, sir. And with that, we come to an end of the very first episode of Candid Diplomacy.